Dear you, I'm writing to you from a version of yourself who remembers the first time emotional exhaustion began to shape your days. It didn't announce itself loudly. It arrived slowly, so slowly that you didn't notice the shift at first. You thought you were just tired, just overwhelmed for a moment, just in need of a little rest. But then the heaviness began lingering longer each day. You woke up already drained. You entered your day already carrying a weight you couldn't name. And you wondered silently why even simple things felt harder than they used to. I remember how you tried to keep going with the same pace, the same responsibilities, the same expectations you placed on yourself. You told yourself that nothing was wrong, that you should be able to handle everything the way you always had. But something inside you was quietly dimming. You were giving energy to everyone, to everything, but rarely giving any back to yourself. People around you still saw your strength, your reliability, your calm presence. They didn't see the small fractures forming inside, the ones you hid behind tired smiles and steady words. You didn't want anyone to worry. You didn't want anyone to think you were struggling. You didn't even want to admit it to yourself. At night, when everything grew quiet, the exhaustion finally spoke. You felt the weight in your chest, the heaviness behind your eyes, the quiet ache that made you want to pause the world for just a moment. You longed for space to breathe, to feel, to exist without obligations, without expectations, without pretending. You weren't weak. You weren't failing. You were carrying more emotional weight than your heart had space for. Every disappointment, every worry, every unspoken feeling, every burden you took on for others, it all accumulated quietly over time. And because you didn't know how to release it, it stayed. It stayed in your shoulders. It stayed in your breath. It stayed in the silence between your thoughts. I'm writing to you now because I remember how lonely that exhaustion felt. I remember how invisible it seemed, even to you. I remember how hard you tried to keep functioning while your heart whispered for rest. And I want you to know, what you felt was real. What you carried was heavy, and you deserved comfort long before you asked for it. Emotional exhaustion doesn't come from one moment. It comes from accumulation. It comes from absorbing too many small hurts, too many responsibilities, too many expectations without time to recover. It comes from being the person who listens more than they speak, who supports more than they receive, who holds things silently so others don't have to. You learn to be strong in ways that slowly drained your softness. You learn to be available in ways that made you unavailable to yourself. And because you handled so much for so long, you didn't notice how depleted you were until the spark inside you felt dimmer than it used to. You didn't realize that constantly pushing through would eventually leave you without energy to feel joy, excitement, or even peace. The world taught you to be productive, responsible, dependable, but it never taught you how to rest emotionally. It never taught you how to refill your heart. Exhaustion shaped your self-worth. You began to believe your value came from what you could offer, not who you were. You believed rest was earned only after you gave everything. You believed slowing down meant falling behind, and so you pushed and pushed and pushed until even the things you once loved felt heavy. But that heaviness wasn't a sign of inadequacy. It was a sign of emotional overload. You weren't meant to function on empty. You weren't meant to hold the world alone. You weren't meant to hide your needs behind resilience. Your past self wants you to understand something tender and important. You became exhausted because you cared deeply, because you loved deeply, because you loved deeply, because you kept showing up even when you had nothing left to give. Your exhaustion was evidence of your heart, not your failure. And beneath all that weight was a quiet truth you couldn't hear back then. You deserved rest long before you reached your breaking point. You deserved help long before you felt overwhelmed. You deserved to feel seen, supported, and held, not only in your strong moments, but in your tired ones too. Emotional exhaustion is not emptiness. It's a sign that you've carried too much for too long without anyone carrying you. And understanding that is the first step toward healing. Now, I want to speak to the version of you reading this today. The you who has survived emotional exhaustion, who is still healing, still learning, still rebuilding your inner strength. This part of the journey is not about pushing harder. It's about softening. It's about returning to yourself. It's about letting your heart breathe again after years of holding everything too tightly. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to set boundaries that protect your energy. You are allowed to choose peace, even if others don't understand. Rest is not a reward. It is a requirement, a necessity, a form of self-respect. Imagine giving yourself the same gentleness you offer everyone else. Imagine treating your exhaustion with compassion instead of criticism. Imagine giving your heart space to mend instead of forcing it to perform. Healing from emotional exhaustion doesn't look like sudden bursts of motivation. It looks like small moments of choosing yourself over and over until your inner world feels safe again. It looks like honoring your feelings instead of hiding them. It looks like stepping away from people or situations that drain you, even if that decision feels unfamiliar. It looks like listening when your heart says, "I need a break." You are not behind for needing rest. You are not weak for needing time. You are not failing because you can't carry everything anymore. You are human beautifully, deeply human. Your future will not crumble because you slow down. In fact, your future will grow stronger because you allow yourself to breathe. Your emotional capacity will return. Your hope will return. Your spark will return. Not through pressure, but through patience. You don't have to force your way forward anymore. You can move slowly. You can move gently. You can move in a way that honors the person you're becoming. Your past self is proud of you for surviving. Your present self deserves comfort. And your future self is waiting with open arms, ready for the version of you who chooses healing over exhaustion. Take a deep breath now. Let it soften something inside you. Let it remind you that you don't have to carry everything alone. You deserve rest. You deserve support. You deserve renewal. Sincerely, you.